Jai Guru, everyone.
Jai Guru.
Guru.
Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Awake, the Life of Yogananda, the minute-by-minute podcast. Today, we have a special episode. We have a very special guest, Hitendra Wadhwa. Good morning, sir. How are you today?
Very good. Thank you. Good morning to you and all your viewers and listeners, Mike.
And as always, I'm joined by Priyank and Chris. How are you guys doing today?
Jai Guru, super excited. Thank you.
Tim, happy to be here.
Fantastic. So today we will be talking about Hitendra mainly, because we have the chance to interview him about his role in the movie and about his pretty interesting life. Like Hitendra, I must say, reading your CV is a very interesting read. There's a lot of things happening. I can see a lot of energy there. You tried a lot of things. You graduated in New Delhi doing math, and then you switched to management, and you did an MBA at MIT, and you went on to do a PhD, and currently you are professor of professional practice at Columbia University. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I feel very blessed to have had my start in Chandigarh, a small town, a little north of New Delhi in India, with parents who were, on their own path, on their own search for what the true meaning of life is. And I was about 10 or so when my family had to transfer out of Chandigarh to Bengal for 3 years. And initially it seemed like quite a displacement for all of us, including for my parents, my father and his profession. But it turned into a huge blessing, because that was the time that they got exposed to the teachings of our Guru, of Yogananda. And Bengal was a perfect place to have those roots form for them initially, and then for me and my siblings as well. Because as we know, Yogananda came from Bengal, and there is such a deep spiritual energy, in that stage, with all the truth-seeking pursuits that he and others have had in Bengal. And so we were blessed to be able to visit, some of the ashrams from a very early age, like the Ranchi ashram, the Dakshineshwar ashram, and not just get exposed to the Indian roots of this teaching and this path, but also incidentally get to immediately see the international fellowship that this work represents. Because during certain times of the year, there would be a lot of foreign devotees who would be traveling in and spending time in Dakshineshwar Ranchi, sometimes being housed by devotees such as my parents. And so one immediately saw that there was something universal about this teaching. And so that was a very formative time for me. I was just, in grade 4 and 5, at that time. And then we came back to Chandigarh. That's where I spent the rest of my high school years. Then on to Delhi, like you said, to study mathematics. And, I fell in love with math. It was for me just a beautiful pursuit of purity and perfection and patterns and just incisive, clear logic. And it was not messy. It was very beautiful. The world was messy, but math was beautiful. And
I read somewhere that you wanted to do psychology, but you did the Indian thing, and there's you have to do a science.
Yeah. Well, I was a little bit of a rebel, and I ended up already veering a little bit off that, if you want to call it, Indian path, because I chose not to do engineering, which would have been even more the groove, right, for us to pursue. And that was a time when I veered off the engineering path, that I was choosing between math and psychology. The reason I wanted to study psychology was I was really interested in human nature, but I ended up like looking, I did it for 1 year in my senior year in high school. But then when I was looking at college classes in psychology, I noticed that they were quite focused on the dark, conditions of the human mind, schizophrenia, depression, the psychology of evil. And somehow that didn't pull me. That's really important work. And I'm grateful for the people who have sought to advance human understanding there and serve those people who in those situations need that light. But I was more interested in the psychology of joy and genius and, and personality and all of these things. And I started to find much more of that from, Master's book, Yogananda's book, Man's Search for Meaning. Man's Eternal Quest, right? Which had topics that spoke to this, in a sense, like ascension of the human spirit to its full potential. And so that's why I dropped the idea of studying psychology then, but then I've come back full circle about, 14, 15 years ago, because after meandering through life, trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up, I ended up, after studying some, math and then business and doing a startup in Silicon Valley, I finally saw myself coming to Columbia, starting to slow life down, starting to teach, and going from teaching more business curriculum to being very drawn to merging, in a sense, the inner and outer lives, that I was pursuing by codifying some of these, Yogananda principles around how to live into a practical curriculum, that we can offer to people pursuing graduate studies in business and beyond. And so that's what I call personal leadership. And there, what I've now seen is that, fortunately, in the last 2 decades or so, the field of psychology has gone through a big turn and has really started to invest in these more positive states, of the human mind. And in some ways, I feel that science is starting to come closer and closer to spirituality, which is kind of how Master saw it. Yogananda had many decades before recognized that a scientific treatment of these topics is very valuable. And he sought to do that as best he could by drawing on the science that was available at that time. And even in some ways, subtly predicting some of the science of today's time when he speaks about, how, habits are basically grooves in the brain. That's what the latest neuroscience now says in a little bit more, physiological and, experimental terms. So
neuroplasticity, is that one of the buzzwords in that field?
Yes, exactly. So beautiful to see in Master's own writing some of the early glimpses of that.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. Oh yeah, go for it.
Sorry, Mike, I want to just touch on something that Hitendra said in his biography there. Autobiography, mini autobiography of Hitendra, that was. You said that the flourishing of that Bengal area, especially in Guruji's time, there was kind of like there was a scientific and literary renaissance in Bengal. Do you think that was down to the British landing and investing heavily there when they first came, or do you think there was something in the water or in the soil that's there, in the culture, perhaps?
Wow, that's a really thought-provoking question, and I don't know enough about the history of Bengal to really do justice to you. Do you have any
No, I just wondered, because so many greats, it's produced so many in the eyes of the West, so many greats. In India we know that there's lots of saints and sages across, and scientific achievements and across the whole of the Indian subcontinent and the States, but Bengal is seen as this jewel, isn't it, for some reason?
It is really special, and it's gotten so much into my psyche after reading the autobiography of a yogi, right? And just observing more broadly, the experience of being there, that every time I meet somebody from Bengal, I just have an immediate reverential kind of wells up inside me. And sometimes some of these people are not necessarily themselves as deeply invested in these paths, so it's a little funny to have that experience, but it does. And I mean, it is a very special, I think, culture. at the same time, it's a culture that is sometimes, struggling a little bit to adapt to the modern times. And when one is there, one can pull one's hair out a little bit, trying to say, hey, Calcuttans and, Bengal. I mean, like, let's organize ourselves. Let's embrace some of the, benefits of modernity. And all of that. And in some ways, that was also Master's genius, right? That he showed that these two worlds don't have to be dichotomized, don't have to live in tension with each other, but can be brought together. I think that's one thing that I hold so close to my heart. The evidence that his teaching and his organization, right, provides of how the inner and the outer are meant to ultimately harmonize. And I think that's an area where both, while celebrating Bengal's incredible crown jewels of spirituality and art and scientific advancements, one can also say, well, that's an opportunity, for that part of India, which so, as you're saying, all of India and different parts, have their own strengths, and one can look and celebrate, the cultures in so many parts of India, just like the rest of the world. And that's another thing I really love about Master's work. I mean, I was just reading the supplementary lesson on the art of personality, and it's so nice to see him talk about how each culture has its own strengths, and if you could borrow this strength from this culture and that strength from that culture, you're in London, we could borrow this strength from the British and that strength from Bengal and what have you. What an amazing expression of the full human potential we could create.
It reminds me of the chapter in the autobiography where Yogananda talks about Jagadish Chandra Bose, the physicist, where it seemed very important to Yogananda that India is not just made large contributions in metaphysics, but also in physics, as he says. And he says the strength of India has always been that knowledge was always something that was contributed and freely shared. And he criticized, I think, a little bit the concept of a patent and of like hiding knowledge behind walls. Did you find this is that something when you are in Bengal, is that something that strikes you, or is that something that will be revealed in the future, maybe through the Bengali culture or the Indian culture at large?
Yes, I mean, if you just step back right now and ask yourself, what kind of contributions are different cultures making to the world family? We have in a capitalist system, in a system in some ways dominated by the cultural ethos of the West, and particularly of America. On the one hand, we would say like the most dominant things today are technology and modern gadgets and the pop culture of the West, and most of that is coming from a very commercialized place. There's some big corporate interest behind it, and some quote unquote business model of how one can make money through doing that. And it's almost like deeply in the DNA of our culture in the West that's what it's got to be. The only way to get people like super organized and invested in developing something that can have like meaningful and beautiful impact in the world, and then find a way to scale it, has got to be in a way that is commercial. And then it's got to have the right laws and the right patents and and all of that around it. But then in the last about 20 years, we're also starting to see Buddhism, we're starting to see yoga take like strong roots in the West. And I think all of us know today how incredible it is to see what a wide embrace those teachings are having. And for the most part, the initial introduction of those teachings has not involved any kind of commercial platform, any kind of appropriation of intellectual property or anything. Of course, given the Western capitalist mind, people over time are seeing the commercial possibilities in this. And so now we have apps where you pay a certain subscription, and now we have yoga and other instructors who are seeking to say, I want to make a living out of this, and to make a living I got to charge for a certain class, and I got to be able to scale this and train other people to do this, and then I'll make even more money out of etc. So the commercial consciousness has started to come in even these practices in the West, but for the most part, I hope that one of the lessons we can learn in the West is that maybe there is a post-capitalistic society that we can evolve where there will be a way to give and take and get the resources one needs to support oneself, but it doesn't always have to be through this capitalist, kind of way. And these kinds of influences and contributions from other parts of the world that have known other kinds of form of exchange and social support, such as the percolation of Buddhist and yogic practices in the West, I hope that they can provide some light, some glimpse, some hope that we can, because I wouldn't claim that we know what that is. I don't, in modern times, what would that system be? What would that give and take be? What would it take from human consciousness to get to that place where we could actually make all of that happen? I don't know. So it has to be something we have to experimentally evolve ourselves into. And I do have a lot of respect for, in many ways, the Western way. I mean, Master had a lot of respect. He talked about the yogis of the West who are creating, successful businesses, but with a very selfless desire to want to help serve humanity, and money was more the enabler, not the end goal. And so I do have a lot of, respect for how, relative to where we were 200-300 years ago, economic advancements and the capitalist system and financial, systems have allowed us to make life more comfortable for us and so many. So respecting very much where we reached, the possibilities in a higher consciousness form of social, sharing, like what you've just highlighted, intrigues me.
Master talks a lot about wisdom, doesn't he? He talks a lot about living your life through the wisdom, intuition, and it strikes me when I listen to you there, Hitendra, that maybe we're missing some of the wisdom aspects of living, and that might then cause some of the answers to come into play when it comes to the economics of interactions with the world. So maybe there's not a systemic change that's needed. It's more the individual level of moving from the sensory to the spiritual and the into the wisdom elements of living that might just bring these answers. You're right. I certainly don't have them either from the mechanical economics side of things, but really it struck me, Hitendra, if I can jump in with a question, you guys. Sorry, we're all bursting with questions, Hitendra, I'm sure. When I read online, you had mentioned that there's business people that you help through your own efforts in the work that you do that are extremely successful, but yet they're lacking some kind of peace, I suppose, calm or tranquility, joy. Can you talk a little bit about this? How first do you know that might be the case, and really what can we do about it, and why is this?
Yeah. My first foray into this was in trying to kind of be of maximal help as I could to my students at the business school at Columbia. So these are typically people in their late 20s, coming from a diversity of backgrounds, different, parts of the world, really, but all kind of generally bought into the idea that, success in life is for them success in their business, and then some wholesome, personal life. And what I noticed there is that there really weren't a lot of tools that we were offering them in business school, and then more broadly in education, whether it was in K-12, kindergarten, all the way to grade 12, or it was in college. We really weren't offering them any tools for helping advance, in a sense, their self-awareness and capacity for self-regulation on things like, what are the values that really drive me at a very, very deep level? What are my core beliefs? This undulating landscape of emotions, I mean, how do I tame it and channel it for the most productive ends? And how am I being limited by unconscious forms of distortions in my thinking and limitations in my belief? And how much of heart am I bringing to everything I do and every interaction I have? How much is that being, in some ways, just ennobled by a feeling of love and care? And am I really a product of my past and my personality, or can I choose to be a more ideal form of who I am? And then if these are things I can work on, then what relationship does this kind of inner work I'm doing have on my outer work? Are these just like two very, completely separate, pursuits, or does one in fact have an impact on the other? And so I started to invest in kind of building some of this inner machinery, being silently guided by a guru and his rich buffet of teaching that I could draw from, and conversations I could have with some of the Swamijis in India and the monks brothers here also in SRF in the US, and then trying to package it in a more scientific form for more palatability in a university environment. So at that time, it was a little bit more an intuition I had that there was something in bringing these two worlds together that had been missed and that needed to be developed. And I might call it the missing core, the missing core of professional education, the missing core of leadership. But it was only after I started to actually do this in the classroom that I got to get fully educated as to what need it was serving and what possibilities it was unfolding. Because yes, absolutely, I did see students really resonate with the desire to become more invested with formal tools in their inner life, and find a way to operate with a greater amount of that self-awareness and self-regulation. But I also learned a few other things from interacting with them and bringing this work out to them. One is that there was a hunger among these students to want to show up in a more authentic way in the workplace. And so conversations started about, what does it mean to be authentic? Does it mean to really flow naturally with whatever feelings and thoughts you're having? And then I had to do some think on that. I had to go back to, to the teachings, and then I went back to the, the teaching masters given us about the true meaning of the Gita and the Mahabharata, and the idea of this war within, and these false friends that we have, and then these true, the true friend, and that's your soul. And that gave me a really nice framework for thinking about sort of how to open people up to the realization that authenticity doesn't mean that you just say whatever you want or feel and express whatever you'd like, but it is about first going through that process of discovery and vanquishing of those false friends to get to that true friend. And then you have earned the right to express that, that truth, on the outside. And they loved it. They found it very thought-provoking, and something that brought them, to peace with the possibilities of both doing what's right, for the world outside, but also what's right for them, if they can bring that together. So that, I think that pursuit of authenticity was one really great learning I got more in a dialogue and evolutionary form in working with them. And then the other was, I realized how much there was for me to tap into from them, rather than bring to them from the outside. And as the space was created for sharing, for people to open up on their personal journeys, for being able to kind of look through life and take like a hero's journey kind of view of one's struggles and failings, the energy in the room just came to a really beautiful place. And I started to collect remarkable stories of people's parents at times, or some other mentor, or their own self, and what they've gone through. And so over time, I've arrived at a conviction that the corporate world, the business world, the organizational world, the working world, because it goes beyond just business, has in the 20th century, broadly speaking, operated on a very narrow band of the fullest of possibilities that human consciousness has, of how we show up and how we engage and how we exchange and how we connect and how we think through and how we push forward, on our outer battles. And then when we can open people up, when we can anchor them in the soul, what I call the inner core, when we can give them tools through which to nurture, these right kind of energies within, and then express them in a way that is productive on the outside, you just get such a multiplicative impact in terms of the possibilities to bring more constructive candor, more connection, more commitment, more curiosity, more calmness, to more joy, as you were also sharing, to our collective pursuit, right? Or whatever it is that we are doing at work.
I loved what you just said about I think you said the search for authenticity among your students, and this is like a goal to have in the workplace. And that reminds me of when Guruji talks about introspection. For me personally, this is one of the most difficult practices on the spiritual path, because it oftentimes involves reoccurring thought that I need to master in my mind, and oftentimes I figure out it was my fault, and like there's some ugly truth in there, or some uncomfortable truth in there. And would you say like regular introspection is like something you would have as part of a leadership curriculum? That was one of my first question. My second one was that this authenticity, in my mind, somehow isn't this diametrically opposed to the pretentiousness that you find in a large corporation these days, or that is traditional there, where everyone is responsible for a part of the business and they try to protect that, and that is more important to them than a real dialogue, a real cooperation with some of their peers? And isn't there like some, like when you try to be authentic, is that, do you feel like is it the way to get ahead in an environment like that?
Yeah, no, these are great questions. I mean, I think as we know, the world is just becoming more and more complex. Change is the order of the day. It's also happening at a very accelerated pace. There is so much uncertainty, so much complexity. And as such, I think we are finding that, if you want to call it 20th century constructs for how to operate and thrive in this world, using, let's say, your analytical mind and training yourself in a certain singular discipline that makes you then able to make major contributions and rise through the ranks based on shining in that discipline, whether it's engineering or law or marketing or what have you, that people are starting to reach the limits of how much they can actually achieve, and tackle some of the stormy conditions of today just through those lenses. And it's showing up in various ways. It's showing up in the mental health challenges that people are facing. It's showing up in the physical symptoms that this kind of stressful life creates, sometimes a little bit later, in a later stage of their career and their lives than earlier, because the body's pretty resilient, for a while. Sometimes it's showing up in the just miscalculations, big miscalculations people are making at work because they're just not able to figure out how to navigate through these very complex conditions. Sometimes it's showing up through blow-ups that happen in a culture, or in the sudden downgrading of a leader because of certain very questionable behavior that suddenly got exposed in the public eye, which was otherwise happening in private, et cetera, et cetera. So in a variety of different ways, the limits of like the way we have operated in the past, I think, are starting to show up. And so the question is emerging in I think many business thinkers and more kind of the leading edge practitioners as to like what's a new path forward. And in that new path, the notion of a greater amount of space and time for self-reflection, for pulling a little bit away from the fray of work to creating that space where creative insights, more objective thinking, can arise. The subtler like stirring of the spirit, from within can be tuned into and listened to. I think you're starting to see in places like Silicon Valley and other, environments that some more advanced, like I think business practitioners are starting to recognize that this is a space they need to create. What exactly is the discipline and how to really fully master it and manifest it and make it like a part of not just your own self, but also your culture, I think is still very much an early stage work in progress for business. Now, on the question of authenticity, I think that if you look at some of the more leading lights in the world of business, then I would say that many of them provide quite inspiring examples of creating high-performing, authentic cultures. At his time, Master would point to some of the people who were very successful, in professional life, whether it was an opera singer or whether it was a scientist or whether it was a business person, as exemplars, of this kind of, very disciplined yogic energy being brought into business, where, you're fully doing it in service of a higher cause. You are seeking to approach it from a place of dispassionate, egoless objectivity with a lot of mental discipline, which I think, a lot of us can really benefit from and take on as a practice of meditative mindfulness, almost consciousness being brought to our everyday moments. That hasn't happened at a mass level. And so the way you characterize how business typically has been typified and how it's been practiced is very true, painfully so. The politics, the silos, the us versus them and turf wars and what have you. But I hold on to this prospect that if you take those best practice examples, from the last, 100 years, if not before, where incredible material achievements have been founded on the basis of a deep commitment to a collective purpose, a just core belief that as long as we keep doing the right thing, resources will flow, opportunities will flow to us, financial, success will flow to us, even the opportunities to lead and power and authority and influence, all of that will flow to us if we keep doing the right things. Then I think we have, in that model, studying both some of these successful organizations of the past, case studies of the past, leaders of the past, as well as integrating within them some of the latest understanding from science and spirituality, to create a framework that hopefully will be of broad appeal to the world. So in my work at Mentora Institute with my team, that is our aspiration, that what you might consider to be the unique bright spots of the way organizations and leadership and businesses happen in the past can be actually systematically analyzed under a spiritual and scientific, microscope. The principles and practices that they are taking on, both on the outer and on the inner, can be dissected and formalized and made into like practical, learnable form, and then offered to whichever team and organization and individual wants to pursue this as their base for how to, how to get to both what I call outer success and also inner success.
When you're teaching at Columbia or mentoring, I'm guessing you don't bring up Yogananda or the teachings directly. Do you ever struggle with that side of things? Because you'd on the one hand, you'd like to just say, look, in this lesson or in this part of your autobiography, this example is perfect for what you're being taught here, for example. But on the other hand, you know that there's a lot of resistance when you bring your own personal, teachings or teachings from a guru, etc. Do you ever, how do you tackle that?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great question. And I have really, been growing on that dimension over the last 15 years, step by step, going through that process of discovery of how best to offer what I can to this community, but also along the way discover, their own spark and start to then co-create with them. So I would say that there was a first phase where I was very mindful and would keep this part completely out, except in just private one-on-one conversations with a few people. If they were to ask me, Professor, tell me a little bit about your path. But otherwise it was like out, and it was more the science. Then there was a second phase where I felt stirred from within to want to push people more. I was so much in love with this journey that we were taking collectively, and I just wanted to reveal a little bit more of what I thought, I'd learned about truth. But in doing that, I might stumble, and I might get to a place where part of the audience got swayed in the right direction, but part of it got a little bit sort of pulled back. And I realized that wasn't really working. Then a third phase. And in that phase, I'm seeing the possibility of starting to integrate personal narrative into that journey from everyone, in the classroom, giving them a certain structure through which to make sure that narrative is not merely just about sharing anything you like, but really about drawing from your life those crown jewels that have been defining for you in some ways, and that can be a contribution to us in terms of giving us an insight or a piece of inspiration that all of us can be enriched by. And so when you give that invitation and people start to, curate through their life and find those kinds of moments or experiences or, et cetera, then I become part of that as well. And in my part, then I can now then share a little bit, not as like a teaching, as in like, I'm offering this to you from the pulpit, but really is more just as my journey, as well. So that has worked. That has worked. But more recently, I've also seen that the world today is kind of different from what it was 15 years ago. And there is a certain expansion of consciousness that is happening. And I think that the discipline of the scientific temperament and the spiritual temperament, these two are starting to come together more than ever before. So as I now work, for example, in translating what I've been doing in executive workshops and the Columbia classroom into writing, because I have a book coming out, and Inner Mastery, Outer Impact, next year. I'm being drawn to taking some even greater liberties with pushing that envelope, just between science and spirituality, and showing the reader that it's extremely constrictive if you kind of like do one without the other. If you pursue spirituality but without a scientific temperament, or science but without a spiritual temperament, you're just artificially limiting the possibilities of how much truth you can get to, how quickly. And so when I open up that aperture a little bit around recognizing that the scientific mind can also be a spiritual mind, then it creates the possibility of a little bit more of master's wisdom to flow through into this. And I'm in a state of ferment, in an early stage of experimentation, to see how much more, merger can happen between these two worlds, that I've operated in, and I'm excited about the possibilities.
Yeah, because I was just noticing on one of your intercessions, it was with Brother Satyananda of the minister at Lake Shrine. So listeners, if you haven't had a chance, go to Hitendra Wadhwa's interview, one of his interviews with Brother Satyananda. It was entitled "The Key to Tackling Life's Hardest Questions." It was one of the good ones, but I could sense that you wanted to retain a objective, that you were in that first phase that that you kind of said in that your threefold journey that you've had for how you share your life experiences, etc. So in that interview, you did pretty well to retain objectivity, and how was, but I noticed, and I remember all of us at London Centre were like, so told, go and Brother Satyananda's talking with it, and the Wadhwa, this is going to be a fantastic one, go and attend. And I looked at all the comments, live comments, and it was always all devotees, but you would no doubt you would have had the viewers that weren't devotees of Yogananda. How was that interview received amongst the wider circle?
I had a colleague, in the Columbia faculty who I have never, ever had any conversation about spirituality with. And he sent me a note right after that. And I know that he had been going through some personal challenges at that time. And he sent me a note right after that and just saying how valuable he found that session. And that was in some ways my lodestone. It was my litmus test that, wow, if he was drawn to viewing this session, and if he's been so moved to reach out to me right after that, as one example of an individual who I've just never so far felt comfortable to really broach a topic like this in our off hours, well, then he must just be the tip of an iceberg of people who did I think get something really meaningful out of it. So that is a really great example, that blessing I had to be with such a beautiful soul and a storied monk here at SRF, Brother Satyananda, to bring the joyful possibility of the spiritual pursuit, right, to a heavy-hearted world, of today, in such a mindful, careful, heartfelt, manner, including with his own personal sharing. He was perfect, for that moment. And that one instance I gave you of just like that one professor is just symbolic, I think, to me, of a much larger group of people who, beyond the SRF YSS circles, got I think very positively influenced by that. So yes, so I am definitely very intrigued. I see tremendous possibility of having all of us, who are on the path and who've been deeply influenced and shaped by Master's work, become ambassadors, become agents, to bring this out. If there's something I can offer from my journey in doing that, it is that, one can bring an almost analytical lens to separating out the different core precepts of this teaching, and helping to meet people where they are by recognizing which of those things they are likely to be open to and which may not yet be the right time to bring up. So in the choice I made, for example, the idea of reincarnation, I find it's a little bit too early to bring that up into mass kind of conversations. The idea of soul, if we were to think about it as an entity that is, separate from the body and lives beyond the body, maybe a little bit too much for mass consciousness yet. But the idea of just consciousness, or your human spirit, or the energy within you, which lasts at least as long as the body lasts, and perhaps more. I mean, that's another conversation another day, but at least lasts, and it's a source of energy, and this energy is connected to something in the universe, and it's boundless in terms of the possibilities it has. And neuroplasticity shows that this energy can help, resculpt you physically and mentally. That I think the world is ready for. The idea that there are inner sources of joy, I think the world is ready for. The idea that there's some kind of universality of, love that is a core principle on the basis of which the universe is made, I think that's something that people are ready for, as I've at least seen it in my context. So So that's one thing, which is, we can become ambassadors for bringing the right truths and insights to our own communities and in our own work and social environments, more than what we've been able to do, I think 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. I remember one time I was talking to my mother, and this is very, when I was a teenager, and she talked a little bit about Harsh, we talk about these things, but we generally don't talk about these things because people will not understand. And this was back in India, at that time. And I smile, sometimes that incident comes back to my mind because I feel like, wow, we are living in so much more of an open space now, where people are becoming more drawn to it. So that's the analytical side of it. Bring a little bit of that analysis to thinking through what exactly is your thesis, what are the 7 or 8 or 10 core building blocks, and which of those may you want to keep out, and which can you open up to now because the world is ready to receive. And then the other is to bring the intuition where you go with the flow, and in the moment sometimes you just take a little bit of a leap, to go beyond the ordinary into the extraordinary in the conversation you're having with that friend or that colleague at work, or in a talk you're giving or something you're writing. And sometimes that intuition can open up a new front, a new vista, and suddenly you see, oh wow, there are so many more possibilities here than I realized. And some of those experiments you might fail, and then you learn something from it, and you'll do something differently next time.
There's something that I had been considering when reading over your material and watching some of the material that you've produced, Hitendra, and it was, you're somebody that's clearly got lots of drive and energy, and you have executed and taken action on some of the skill sets that you have, which is inspiring others and laying things out in a scientific way to provide a roadmap for people to have success in their life. And I see some of the topics you've talked about is success and how to define success. I wonder, outside of the work that you're doing, I'm curious, where do you see the opportunities? I'm thinking for people listening to this, there might be people on the cusp of maybe having a business idea, having spirituality at the core of that idea, but maybe they're lacking the impetus to take action. I mean, what areas do you see opportunities in the world for bringing the spiritual world and the world that we live in, the material world, together outside of the work that you're immediately focusing on?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll give you maybe like two thoughts on that. The first is, it has been for me a really meaningful learning over the last 15 years that if we are not seeking to imbue every moment of our interface with the world with, who we are at our core, it's a missed opportunity. And I look back at my life now and I smile at, like, or I pull my hair out. I would like, what were you thinking? What were you doing? Like, there you were, in those years that you were at McKinsey or in Mountain View and doing a startup and all of that. And then you were kind of like keeping these two worlds, separate, and quietly you're having conversations with the guru from within, but like outside you were doing that work. We don't have to. There are ways through which to build that bridge and to, thoughtfully express, your spiritual self in every moment, everything you do. So that's just a quest, or an ideal that I just want to kind of like invite everyone. And like, and I know just people who are very inspiring in that regard, and they do it, whether they're a doctor, whether they're a lawyer, whether they're an academic or what have you. So it's not new, to our community, and our fellowship. There are people out there who have been deeply living the teachings in every moment of their life. And for me, it was a learning to go through to bring these two worlds together. But then more broadly, then to answer your question, my second thought is that, so at my institute, Mentora, we are starting now a Mentora Foundation. And the whole purpose of that is to help build change makers across disciplines, change makers and people who see like a much more luminous future than where we are today, and then who seek to build a bridge and then take people along on that journey to help advance humanity, advance the world around that thing that they are most deeply invested in. And as I have been putting together the founding kind of ideas, for this foundation, and talking to people and getting advice and, etc., what I've realized is like, yeah, there is really no profession that in some ways is not amenable to being approached in the best possible way from a spiritualized place, whether it's art, right? Whether it's science, engineering, medicine, all that. Like, if you want to call it humanity needs to just so much more actively be expressed in everything we do. And so to that end, I would, invite, all of us who are part of this dialogue today to ask yourself, what is my vocation? What is my profession? What is it that I do? And this could be at work, or this could be even in service we do to people in our home and personal life. And then ask, okay, what would it mean to, if you want to call it, to spiritualize this? What would it mean to bring a certain kind of soul consciousness to this? And identify examples of people who have done exactly that. And I would say that, across some of the more established, professions in the world, there's no reason that if you really investigate and study, you will not find examples of people like that who have approached it from a place of higher consciousness than the average representative, of that discipline. And that provides you a sense of possibility. It provides you examples. It provides you stories. And then you build on those with your own, and then you reflect on that with your circle of friends and advisors. And before you know it, a certain model is starting to develop for you about how in your everyday moments, as well as in your more epic battles and epic moments, you would seek to bring that out. Now, if you read Masters How to Live teachings, it's replete with just so much insight and understanding about how to really inform your relationships, your moments of conflict, your adversities, your desire to excel with spiritual wisdom. So a combination of that, these data points of exemplars that you find, within your profession, your own thinking, experiments you can run, and just a core conviction that is the way God made this world. God didn't make this world for all of us to become sadhus and go to the Himalayas and just retire from active engagement with the world. God made this world for some of us to be engineers, and some to be doctors, and some to be artists and writers and what have you, because it's this boundless spirit that is being expressed in all of those beautiful, professions. And yet he made it so that when we get there, we are not divorcing ourselves from like spiritual consciousness. We are expressing it in a very unique and special way, right?
Yeah, Chris, when I remember when I was a student, when I was just graduated and I went into my first, placement as a graduate engineer, I was very, very driven. And when I left my first like rotation, the team gave me this book, Gandhi CEO, and it's got like hundreds of examples where Gandhi wasn't, just a old man, pious saint that was leading the politics of India, but he's actually a leader of, hundreds of millions of people. And there were some things, principles that he really used to inspire and bring all those people with him, and they're directly applicable obviously to our lives as well, and we can use those. I wanted to touch on that for a figure like Gandhi. It's obviously quite easy for us to think of the spirituality element in a leader such as Gandhi, or a movement such as big as the independence movement in India. But Hitendra, can you tell us about other than Steve Jobs, perhaps other examples where great leaders, and perhaps not so well known, but great leaders nevertheless, you have used this knowledge or intuition born from meditation and other spiritual practices, but they don't necessarily preach about it as such, but that might inspire us, such as Gandhi has done. But we all know about Gandhi, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for bringing that up. I mean, it's a great example of what we're just talking about here. So yeah, I mean, it's a messy world of politics, and especially when you're trying to, displace authoritarian power, that has ruled over India for so long, and all that. I mean, for Gandhi to enter that messy fray and bring beautiful spiritual energy is testament itself, right, to the possibilities. But like you're saying, beyond, some of the people who really inspired me in this regard are like Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, Mother Teresa, although in her case one can say, oh yeah, but that's, she was really a spiritualist, she was a saint. But then again, in the fray of like, serving the destitute and the diseased, and setting up her order across 130 countries and getting to be acknowledged as like a world changer, it meant something, in the material impact she was having. Eleanor Roosevelt, this first lady during the FDR years in the United States, but also someone who helped contribute to the founding of the United Nations and the codifying of the Declaration of Universal Human Rights, and remarkable leader. So these are some examples. But I would also offer that just look around you, and you'll find, perhaps sometimes in the most unexpected of places, people doing small things with great love, or great awareness, or a great sense of just presence and calmness and thoughtfulness in how they're operating. And even if these same people are not necessarily like that the whole year, seeing those bright spots, makes you start to see the possibilities that everyone has access to that place, and everyone at their core has such soul force in them. And it's, you just start to respect, the fact that I thought this world was like pretty diluted, but I'm actually finding that it's quite illuminated. It just seems to forget that illuminated state, oftentimes. But I do see it here, I do see it there, I do see it there, and then there's this bounty of riches of observations and stories that you're carrying from your everyday experiences with people that just reinforce for you new lessons, new learnings, new validation, right, from the everyday heroes beyond these more iconic ones. I mean, I'll give you an example. One of my students shared the story. She said that she was, she's working in Wall Street, not the kind of place that we typically think about, to exemplify these kinds of values, right? And she said that this one year, she and other traders in her team got a decent sized bonus, but the company had just done okay, not that well, and so there was this person who was like their research partner, who was doing a lot of back office work, not front office work, and that person didn't get any bonus. And she said, I felt a little bit outraged that the money has been shared in this way, merely because we are coming from a community that is very much in demand out there, and they don't want us to leave. But this person, apparently they found this person to be replaceable, and so they weren't going to give him a bonus, they were going to give us a bonus. And she said, I decided to take part of my bonus and create like a pool for him. And then I went to the rest of my team and said, this is what I'm going to do, because I think he has done so much, to help support us, to get us to this place. And they all contributed too. They all felt, similarly. So we went and ultimately, offered him what was a sizable amount at that time with all the contributions. And we told him also, like, this is not like us giving you our bonus. This is yours. This is meant to be yours. We wouldn't have gotten ours if it wasn't for all this that you did and all of that. And she said that he was very moved in that moment. And then she said, like a month later, he came back to her and he said, I really wanted to thank you for what you and the team did for me that time. It was more than just what you did, because what I want you to know is I was going through a very serious depression that time. My brother had been in really bad health, and I was about to quit, and I was not in a good place. And that sense of affirmation of what this community means to me and what there is in the human spirit and how I'm cared for mattered even more than the financial, gift that you all provided me. Oh, I mean, what a beautiful story. what a beautiful story. And a small act of spiritual grace, right? Now, I don't know the student in terms of how she lives, every day. Does she activate that state of grace all the time, or, all of that, right? But I can say that in that moment, God was acting through her, right?
Very true.
Mike?
Yeah.
Did you want to go, Chris, or?
I was going to say there's probably a few questions, but maybe we're running out of time. I was going to say, I want to be respectful of
Okay, I wanted to throw one more in there before we close. And when I researched you, Hitendra, I came across, of course, your Institute for Life and Leadership, the Mentora Institute. And I really like the values that you put out there, like you put purpose, wisdom, love, growth, and of course, self-realization at the end, which I quite liked. And I think it's a bit like you mentioned earlier, like that we're in this time where our old institutions, they seem a bit dated and people seem ready for maybe to try out something new. And if anything, the pandemic has probably increased this notion even more. Like I feel like the pandemic has become like a time machine pushing us 10 years in the future mentally. This idea of self-realization, because like I often see this as people, they are unhappy and they want to change something in their life, so they go towards self-realization. But then when you add this to like I would say like a curriculum or a course, then you basically say, I also want other people to have self-realization, as an idea of like somehow like egotistic altruism, where you say like, if other people get what they want, then I might rather get what I want. Do you feel like this is part of like this new style of leadership that you were talking about?
Yeah, well, if you take any great movement, any great advancement that a leader has been able to make, it has come from a place where that leader has had to imbue the people with a very empowered sense of identity as to who they are, what they are capable of doing, to almost make superhumans out of humans, at least for that moment, when they had to go through that, whatever it is that they were embarked on together. So that's an example to me of a glimpse of self-realization that the leader has brought to them, that we have an indomitable spirit within us, that we are the most creative people, in the planet, who are change makers, like Steve Jobs was trying to do to people at Apple, or Gandhi, that we can be very much non-violent practitioners of non-cooperation movement against the British, even while they're in that moment doing wrong things, and all of that. So there are these soul qualities that are affirmed by that leader in that moment, which to me is the first glimpse of something like that. Then you have other like small subtle ways in which self-realization like energy is cultivated at work, when a leader recognizes, as I heard once from a conversation that one of the cabinet members of Bill Clinton's cabinet, he once shared. He said that there was a moment where we were all converging on a certain decision, and that and then the president said, "Now I'd like you all to like take a break and go back, because there's so much agreement that we've come to so quickly that something must be wrong. So let's just kind of go back and think about like what are all the risks and all of that here, and come back tomorrow." So that realization that we need to get out of this kind of fray we're in, go into the quietness of our own mind, see what bubbles up, and then come back with it tomorrow. It's kind of like a recognition that, there is a quiet spirit within that can actually be a source of great insight, for us, et cetera. So of course, today, you're having organizations who are getting drawn to the idea of, supporting yoga and meditation like practices in the workplace as well. But I think in just a small, simple, practical ways like what I just shared with you, which I've seen very much in evidence in great acts of leadership and great movements, affirming a certain soul quality, activating that human spirit, quietening it, to get to the best, insight. Those are ways in which I think very much, leaders are recognizing that to get to the highest like potential, collective intelligence, pursuing a certain cause with resilience, this kind of self-realization energy becomes very valuable.
Yeah. Thank you very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
I'm looking forward to seeing the continued arc of your work and perhaps finding other moments to meet you. So please do stay in touch, and let's create that kind of an opportunity. So perhaps when I'm in London next, I'd look you up, and if you're down this way, Mike, around Glendale or Hollywood Temple, once they open up, Hollywood I know is closed right now, but let me know for sure.
Yeah, sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Good luck in Brazil, and hope to get a chance to see you too.
Thank you very much.
You're always welcome.
Yes.
Thanks everyone.
Thank
Jai
you.
Guru.
Hey, Guru.
Jai Guru.
Thank you.